That day began like any other, but I could never have predicted how it would end. Over the years, my stepson Ethan and I had built a friendly relationship. Not necessarily close, but we got along well enough. He was in his mid-20s now, confident and athletic, and his maturity had always impressed me. While I tried to keep my role in his life simple, being his stepmom came with its own challenges. It all began with a casual invitation. Ethan asked me if I wanted to join him for a movie that weekend. It didn't seem unusual. We often went out together to keep things relaxed, especially since his father, my husband, was usually busy with work. It felt harmless, perhaps even like an opportunity for some bonding. Without giving it much thought, I agreed. The theater was crowded that night, but Ethan had reserved tickets ahead of time, so we had great seats in the middle, perfect for enjoying the movie. As we settled in, I sensed an unusual energy between us. Maybe it was just me, or perhaps the dim lighting and quiet intimacy of the theater made things feel different. As the movie started, I tried to focus on the plot, but my thoughts kept drifting. Ethan was sitting close, and I felt a strange tension I couldn't quite explain. His presence seemed different. Maybe I was overanalyzing, but he appeared more focused on me than usual, even though we weren't speaking much. As the movie continued, I caught him looking at me several times, and each time he quickly shifted his gaze back to the screen, as if he had been caught. The turning point came when Ethan leaned in suddenly and whispered to me. His voice was low, husky, and right next to my ear. "Are you enjoying the movie?" he asked. I nodded, trying to act casual, but the way he spoke sent a shiver through me. His breath against my neck didn't seem like an innocent question anymore. I could feel my heart rate increase. I told myself to stay calm. He's your son. You're overthinking this. But I couldn't ignore the heat building between us. I had never felt like this around him before. Despite my efforts to push the feelings away, they lingered, and part of me didn't want to fight them. Things escalated unexpectedly. Halfway through the movie, during a quieter scene, Ethan's hand brushed against mine. It was a light touch at first, almost like an accident. I tried to ignore it and focused on the movie, but the touch came again, this time more intentional. He didn't pull away, and neither did I. My breath caught in my throat, and the silence between us seemed louder than the movie itself. Slowly, his hand began to caress mine, his fingers grazing my skin in a way that sent jolts through my body. My heart raced, and my mind was filled with thoughts I shouldn't have been having. The tension between us was undeniable now. I was torn between the growing desire and the voice inside my head telling me this was wrong, but I couldn't stop him. I couldn't. His hand slid over mine gently, but with clear intention, until his fingers intertwined with mine. My pulse quickened, my body reacting before my mind could catch up, and I squeezed his hand in return. We sat there in the dark theater, our hands clasped together, both fully aware of the boundary we were crossing. I couldn't focus on the movie anymore. My thoughts were a mix of confusion, excitement, and guilt. What was happening between us? This wasn't supposed to happen, but I couldn't deny the thrill it gave me. The forbidden nature of it made everything feel more intense. Then Ethan leaned in again, his lips brushing against my ear, so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. His voice was thick with something I couldn't define, but recognized all too well. A shiver ran through me as my body responded to him in ways I couldn't control. My skin felt hot, my heart pounding, and my breath shaky. I should have pulled away. I should have ended it then and there, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I turned slightly toward him, my lips mere inches from his. My mind screamed for me to stop, but my body had already made its decision. Before I could reconsider, his lips pressed against mine. It started as a soft, hesitant kiss, but when I didn't pull away, it deepened. His lips moved against mine with an urgency that matched the wild beating of my heart. The kiss was filled with a hunger, a longing that had clearly been building between us for longer than I realized. My hand instinctively gripped his arm as the kiss grew more intense. In that moment, everything else faded away. The movie, the theater, and the world outside. It was just the two of us, caught in a whirlwind of passion neither of us had expected. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily, our hearts racing in sync. I stared at him, my mind reeling. What had just happened? What had we done? Ethan looked at me, his eyes dark with desire, and whispered, "I've wanted to do that for so long." His words jolted through me. This hadn't been an impulsive decision for him. He had been thinking about it, wanting it. And as much as I knew it was wrong, I couldn't deny that a part of me had wanted it too. We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of our actions hanging heavily in the air. My thoughts were a whirlwind of guilt, confusion, excitement, and fear. But underneath it all was a desire I couldn't ignore. The rest of the movie passed in a blur. Neither of us spoke, but the tension between us was electric, crackling in the air like a live wire. When the credits rolled, we stood up in silence, both unsure of what to say or do next. As we left the theater, Ethan reached for my hand again. This time, I didn't pull away. I let him take it, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver down my spine. We didn't speak much on the drive home. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and feelings we hadn't acknowledged. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew things between us had changed forever. When we got home, Ethan paused at the door, turning to look at me. His eyes were filled with a longing that mirrored my own, and for a moment I thought he was going to kiss me again. But instead, he smiled a slow, knowing smile that sent a thrill through me and said, "Good night." Then he walked inside, leaving me standing there, my heart still racing, my mind still spinning. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the kiss, and about the way his touch had made me feel. I knew it was wrong, but something had shifted between us, something that couldn't be undone. In the days that followed, Ethan and I continued as though nothing had changed, but the tension between us was undeniable. Every glance, every accidental touch sent a jolt through me, reminding me of that night in the theater. Then one evening, when his father was out of town, everything came to a head. Ethan entered the living room where I was sitting, his eyes dark with the same desire that had been building between us. Without a word, he crossed the room, sat down next to me, and placed his hand lightly on my leg. My heart pounded in my chest, and for a moment I thought about stopping him, ending this before it went any further. But then he leaned in, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered, "I want you." In that instant, all my resolve crumbled. What followed was a blur of passion and desire, whispered words, tangled limbs. It was wrong, and we both knew it, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the heat between us, the way his touch made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. After it ended, we lay there in silence, both fully aware of the line we had crossed. There was no going back now. Things between us had changed forever. But as I lay there, my heart still racing, I couldn't help but wonder, what would happen next? Would we ever be able to go back to how things were? Or had we crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more thrilling, suspense-filled tales like this, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel.